Hello and welcome to Seance, our Deathtrap tomb design stream, because that's what we're doing in this one, but it's basically a Deathtrap dungeon design build here with Sersa Victory, one of the masters of the genre. How you doing tonight, Sersa?
I am hanging in there, surviving. How are you doing?
Still trying to wake up a little late as my brain could not focus and wake up at the same time, but we are getting there. So second episode, first one, awesome. We actually picked basically the themes of our Deathtrap dungeon, and those were tomb and corrosion, right?
That's correct.
All right. So what's our plan for tonight?
So tonight we are going to start getting into the specifics of designing our Deathtrap dungeon. Um, Tonight's episode is about a unique mechanic, or what I sometimes call a gimmick.
Mhm.
And I think before we dive in, do we want to do maybe a really quick recap for those who may be joining us for the first time and may not know what they're watching?
Yeah, absolutely. Why don't you go ahead? What are we?
Sure.
What are we doing?
What is Seance? So Seance is a stream slash podcast where Ryan and I are collaboratively building a Deathtrap dungeon adventure in the style of something like the Tomb of Horrors. And each episode, we are going to focus on a different element of Deathtrap dungeon design. And throughout the process, I will be taking Ryan through a number of exercises, none of which he has seen before. So none of this is rehearsed. I put together these exercises based on game design theory and my own experience writing Deathtrap Dungeon Adventures. I've been publishing since about 2008, 2009. And the hope is that, one, people will find it entertaining to watch, and feel free if you're in chat to throw ideas out. We had a number of awesome ideas last time, especially from Jason and Janelle, who really pitched
Absolutely.
in and helped refine the ideas. But also, my goal is to give people some practical tips, techniques, and theory that hopefully you can take back to your own games and your own dungeon adventures that you would run for either your friends at home or publish on a place like Itch or Drive-Thru RPG. So as Ryan mentioned previously, we dug into our dungeon's theme. And by that, I mean we came up with two theme keywords and smushed them together. We came up with verbs, which are thematic actions that the players could potentially take over the course of the adventure. And finally, we came up with what are called Deathtrap Dungeon materials, where basically we made a big list of objects or bits of scenery or creatures or even more abstract concepts, and made a list for each theme keyword, combined those randomly, and came up with some pretty wild initial ideas, including what I see here is a sarcophagolem. That's what pops out at me.
Sarcophagolem,
The
man.
sarcophagolem, and yeah, patina. We talked for about 45 minutes about patina. That was good.
That was a good one. Yeah, Tina's good. I mean, I
Yeah,
love me some patina.
that's right. Yeah, and so tonight we will be talking about a special, unique mechanic for your adventure or a gimmick.
Right.
So
I'm
I
excited for
think
this. This can really not. I mean, tomb and corrosion defines the dungeon, but this is really going to define the kind of play that we do within the dungeon, right?
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And as you'll see over the next, maybe 2 hours or so, the way that we start taking our theme, which is sort of abstract at the moment, and translating it into real game design, into real mechanics and systems that will hopefully create fun Deathtrap Dungeon play for people. So I guess if you want to pull up that first slide of the jam board that we'll be working on tonight.
Here we go.
Perfect. So what is a unique mechanic? What is a gimmick? What do I mean when I say that? Well, for the purposes of tonight's episode, a unique mechanic is a special rule. It could be a mini game, or some recurring element throughout the dungeon that has its own unique rules or mechanics that help reinforce the theme of the dungeon. And I'm going to go into specific examples tonight of what some special rules I've used in my own modules and talk about the different high level categories of unique mechanics and gimmicks. I'll then give an example of one that I'm doing for my next Deathtrap Dungeon module called Chapel of Grief. And then you and I are going to work together tonight to come up with an idea for a unique mechanic, a special rule, a mini game, or unique recurring element for our dungeon. So if you want to go ahead, I'm also waking up too, so I apologize. It's it's been slow to get going. So if you want to jump over to slide 2, you'll see I've got a couple sticky notes here. It should be the very top there.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got 6 different sticky notes here, and each of these represents an important aspect of the unique mechanic. Why do we create these unique mechanics? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first, and it's one I've already mentioned, is that it helps us reinforce the theme. And when we were talking in the previous episode, we got into a little bit of a discussion about how, unfortunately, many dungeon modules can feel bland or boring or forgettable. And to stand out, either if you're publishing into a marketplace and you want to stand out for potential customers, or if you want to just surprise veteran players in your home game, having a unique theme is important. And the unique mechanic is one of the best ways to reinforce the theme by coming up with something that is unique to your module, unique to your dungeon. That's already going to give the players something to remember when they leave. Like, oh, that was the module with blank, right? So the second note here I have, which is kind of related to reinforce the theme, is that the unique mechanic gives us an opportunity to implement a verb. So, as I mentioned in the previous episode, we made lists of verbs that match the theme keyword. So, our first keyword was tomb, and we had things like exhume, mourn, consecrate, inhume, I think was the other one.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And for corrosion, we had things like dissolve, protect, corrode, those sorts of things. So one of the things that we can do with our unique mechanic is pick one of those verbs and say, all right, how do we create an interesting special rule that's unique to just this module that requires the players to do that verb? So, for example, we might do this, we might not, but let's say we picked pray. Okay, are we going to introduce special prayer rules? So in one of my old modules from 4th edition, one of the themes of the dungeon was the gods, right? There was these different gods that held sway over different domains. And there was a special rule in that module where you could boast to the gods. It was like a challenge, a gauntlet. And that implemented one of the verbs that you would expect in a temple-like dungeon, which was pray. And by praying and making these boasts to the gods, they could potentially earn some benefit, or if they fail their role, wind up being disgraced by those gods. But that's something we'll come back to here in a moment. So one of the other things that we can do with our unique mechanic is we can tie together dungeon elements. So one of the things that can also make a dungeon adventure feel less than fun is if it doesn't feel cohesive. And I want to put this question to you. Do you have a memory of playing a dungeon adventure, or really kind of any adventure, Ryan, where you just felt like you weren't really playing a cohesive thing? It just felt like a bunch of random stuff kind of just spit onto the page. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, are you asking me yes or no? You asked me some specifics, because I got plenty of specifics, but
I mean, if you want to share specifics, it's up to you.
I mean, just WotC. I mean, we shit on it I shit on it every time I come on stream, but like, just so many of their stuff doesn't feel. It feels piecemeal. Like it feels like, I think part of it too is that they're really poor about giving instructions on how to run things the way that the writer intended, which makes it feel very disparate. Um, but I think even as far as, I know we talked about it last week, it was the dungeon in the Southlands in the Empire of the Ghouls from Kobold Press, where just out of fucking nowhere in like a like Egyptian-ish themed dungeon, there's like a gravity trap. I'm
Exactly
like,
right.
why? What's the purpose of that?
Exactly. How does this tie back to the broader theme of the dungeon? And yeah, 100%. And one of the things that we'll do later on in this episode is go through a number of different kinds of dungeon elements and brainstorm ways to tie them back to the unique mechanic that we create for the adventure. Um, so after that, one of the other really important ways that a unique mechanic can help elevate your dungeon adventure, your Deathtrap dungeon, is it adds a layer of challenge, strategy, and drama. Now, this can, be different depending on what kind of unique mechanic you end up going with. So some of them might be, and I'll give some specific examples about this shortly. It could be an additional sort of challenge or threat that the players have to deal with. It could be a limited resource that they have to manage. And so those are more on the sort of the gameplay tactical side. On the other side of it, you might have a special rule that more encourages role playing and adds an interesting layer of drama on top of what is a vanilla dungeon adventure otherwise. So related to that, one of the things that I really like to do with my unique mechanics is to design it such that it gives the player characters a shared identity. And that leads to this kind of picture I put here. This is an illustration from a collection called The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. And specifically, this is from a story called Queen of the Black Coast, where Conan uh, joins the crew of Belit, who is the pirate queen, the Queen of the Black Coast, and they sail up this forbidden tributary that no sailing ship has ever come back from to raid a temple there. And what I'm doing with my February module for Dungeon 23 is I want all the players to feel like they're part of a pirate crew that has been sent on what is essentially a suicide mission into this lost shrine in the jungle off the coast. And so by coming up with a unique mechanic that at the outset characterizes all of the players as part of a group, and there's specific mechanics, like they're going to get pirate nicknames and they're going to have vices, and that's why they've been kicked out of their respective societies. So these things will have mechanical implications, like, okay, depending on which vice you pick, you become more or less susceptible to different dangers. But from the get-go, the player characters are already feeling like they're bonding. And I think that's really important in one-shot adventures in particular, where you're almost always playing with pre-gens. And when you're just picking up a pre-gen off a table, it can be difficult to put yourself in that headspace to really inhabit the character. And just by having a unique rule for your module that is based on the player character's, shared reason for delving this death trap dungeon, that can already start people off on a good foot. Does that make sense?
Yep, absolutely. Um,
So the last thing I want to say here is, I put in quotes, the way to think about Death Trap Dungeons is that they're more party game than collaborative storytelling or theater. What I mean by that is a lot of the specific examples of unique mechanics that we'll talk about tonight are in many ways lifted directly from party games. Because one of the things that I like to do is when I'm trying to think about, okay, I'm going to have people over, or I'm going to go to a convention and I want to run a Death Trap dungeon. It's not enough to just have a well-designed dungeon and, with engaging dangers and things like that. But I want just the people present to have fun. I want them to have fun interacting with the game. I want them to have fun interacting with each other. I want there to be lots of fun moments and funny moments. And so that's, I think, another really, really useful Another thing that unique mechanics are good at is giving a Deathtrap dungeon adventure sort of a party-like atmosphere when you're playing. And I think, you know, you've talked a lot about Mailed Fist and how I think you had like what 6 tables playing, and
Oh
there
yeah,
was
I
some
mean
stuff
we
in
ran
Mailed
it
Fist.
like straight tournament style.
Yeah, so can you talk about sort of the atmosphere when you were running that adventure?
Well, we um sorry, we're having an audio issue. Just give me 1 second. We'll be back in just one moment.
Sure.
Hey, sorry about that. Just had a weird audio thing going on, but we are back, and Sersa's going to. Oh, everything picked up right where we left off, so we are good. Let me just switch to page 2 again. Maybe we'll actually edit that, and there we go. So,
Amazing.
what were you saying, Sersa?
Yeah, so basically, to wrap up this slide of the board before we kind of get into some of the more of the fun stuff, is there's a lot of different reasons to add a unique mechanic to your Deathtrap Dungeon adventure, and ultimately, it all just leads to this last little note here, which is that a good Deathtrap Dungeon feels like a party game, and that people are engaging with each other, they're engaging with the adventure, and when you leave, you're going to have a lot of kind of wild memories. So I think we
Yeah.
can jump to the next slide of the jam board. And this here, hopefully folks can see it okay. This is a screen grab from my upcoming Deathtrap Dungeon adventure called Chapel of Grief. And this is a screen of some of the different unique mechanics in the adventure. So one of them is this mechanic called the New Queen. Now the lore of the dungeon is that there was an old queen and she had a prophecy that failed and she locked herself in her chapel, and now there's a new queen that has come to usher in a new age of peace and prosperity for her people. Now the new queen has a couple of different abilities that she can use in the adventure, and there's 2 things I want to call out. First, there's that role-playing aspect of it where the queen has to wear a veil, a bracelet, or a crown. So when I ran this at home, my friend who played the new queen, she actually got a veil and wore it the whole time. And one of the other special rules is that everybody at the table has to refer to the new queen as Your Grace, and that includes the game master. So already you're creating something memorable about your dungeon just by adding a little bit of a little role playing thing here. On the more
Yeah.
kind of tactical gamey side, she has a power that she can use essentially once per short rest, where if she gets hit by an attack, she can point to one of her Queen's Guard, which we'll talk to in a second, and say, hey, you come take the hit for me. Right. So we're balancing kind of the role play aspect and the more kind of gaming mechanical part. So related to the new queen are the Queen's Guard, her 3 bodyguards, her sword, her torch, and her cross. And the players have to decide who will be what role in the Queen's Guard. Each has a unique ability. So there's the mechanical gaming side again. There are also specific role playing prompts that come up through the adventure. So again, you're hitting the more thematic side. And as I mentioned earlier on, one of the things that a unique mechanic can also do is give the players a sense of identity, a shared identity. And this is one of the ways to do that. So, are there any questions about sort of the groundwork we've set for unique mechanics?
No, not really. I think when one of the questions I think you asked as my audio got weird and I couldn't really hear you was about when we played Mailed Fist, and
Yes.
we ran that for our meetup. We had I think it was 6 tables of 4 players plus a GM. So that was what, 6 times 5, like 30, 35, 30. Is that how math works? Yeah, about 30 people
30,
playing.
yeah.
We had about like 10 people watching. I think we're actually at Janelle's house, who's in stream right now. We might have done it at Andy's. No, I think it was Janelle's. But obviously within the game itself, there are a lot of unique mechanics. But even within the playing of the game, because we did it tournament style, when you ring the bell golem, you get to do it like once per like session you play the game, right?
Right.
So we actually put out because we were all like spread throughout different rooms in the house. We actually put in kind of like a central location. We put a bell. So when the table decided to ring the bell, they had to actually send somebody from their table, run across the house to the central bell location, and actually ring the bell loud enough for everyone in the house to hear, so that all the other tables playing could be like, oh shit, they already rang the bell. Should we ring the bell?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
so that's like you can like I'm like what we did kind of out of game with like I don't want to say unique mechanic, but a little memorable bit, kind of like what you're saying now, where someone's be like, oh man, remember when like what's his name like ran through the house and like did the whole thing. So yeah, it's fun to gamify it and to add these like little mechanics in, because you know a lot of times, especially like when you've used cards and things like that in some of yours, it harkens back to something you've already done. So it like sinks into your head a little bit easier because it connects to another memory, and it's just I don't know, it's just a good time. It's like one of my favorite parts of the modules that you ran, which and why they became my favorite modules. So
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I actually totally forgot about the bell and that rules.
mhm.
And I mean, ideally, that's what a good unique mechanic does. It creates those interesting moments, especially when you have multiple tables playing, that you're, participating in an event, right? That you're not going to, night traffic school to sit through something for a few
Right.
hours, but it's like, oh, I'm pumped up for this. Okay, so we can go ahead and slide on to the fourth uh, page of the board. And this is where we're going to really start actually doing some fun work tonight. The lecture part is almost over, I promise. So I have here a couple of different categories of unique mechanics I want to step through. And what I'm going to do is very briefly go through what each of these are, give an example of how I've used these different types of unique mechanics in my own adventures. And then you and I are going to pick one of these as a potential unique mechanic for our Tomb plus Corrosion Deathtrap dungeon.
Okay.
So the first
Okay.
one here,
Okay.
yeah, is special tokens. So what you can do is you might create a special rule where there are certain tokens that the players or the game master can collect and spend at different points. So an example of this is in my February Dungeon 23 adventure that's sort of based off of Hidden Shrine of Tomoe-chan, in which the lower levels of the dungeon are filled with poison gas. Now I could have had it just be, all right, every 3 turns the player characters make a saving throw, and if they fail, they take some damage. And I'm like, okay, that's a good start, but I want to do something more interesting with it to really drive home the fact that it's like, yes, the poison gas is the primary enemy right now, and you got to keep moving. So what I did was I created a token system where every 30 minutes or every time the player characters waste time and trigger a wandering monster roll, I get, or the referee gets a poison gas token. And it's like a big green poker chip or a bead. I put it in front of me. And then at various points, I can spend those tokens to create the effects of poison gas in a character. So I can maybe spend 1 token to cause them to get brief tremors and they drop an item they're about to use. Like, oh, I'm about to drink this potion. Well, no, you don't. You get tremors and you drop it. I could spend more to cause rerolled saving throws or attack rolls, all the way up to potentially killing a character with poisonous gas. So tokens are cool because they create this fun little mini game where the referee gets a resource to spend and there's the drama of seeing all of the tokens get accrued. Another example of a type of different unique mechanic is unusual dice. So I like to grab dice from games that aren't like D&D or role-playing games. I had a weird like $10 game that had like a treasure chest and it had a bunch of cool symbols. And so I turned that into sort of like a deck of many things, chaos dice type thing, where you would roll on it and it had different class symbols. Okay, there was a dark one, and it had like a skull and a fireball, and then you had a light die and it had like a helmet and a wizard. And I'm like, okay, roll those 2 dice, and the class that you roll and the effect that you roll, that's what happens. And that was a lot of fun. I also like to go raid other board games for their playing pieces. So if you've got Scrabble tiles or chess pieces, I have a spinner, a blank spinner that I bought off of Amazon, like a board game spinner. I might try to work that into something soon. Special cards, so you might either grab playing cards, tarot cards, or make your own. An example being the cards in Mailed Fist, Necropolis of the Mailed Fist, my Kobold Press adventure, where you have a lineage, and that gives you a special power, and you draw a mother card and a father card, put them side by side, and that gives you your power. Envelopes is one that I enjoy using too, where you can put secrets into them. So either you can put them as the GM before the game and do kind of like a look under your seat type thing, which is always fun, or you could have players put secrets or write something down and then seal those envelopes and then only open them at dramatically appropriate moments. Note cards for pregame questions. There was a module I ran a while ago for my friends that essentially asked them a couple of questions. And one of them, for example, was like, if you were in the dungeon and another member of the party got stuck in a pit trap, would you go back to save them or would you just press something? And now they didn't reveal this to one another until it came up. And there was a scene where I think the wizard fell into a pit trap and the thief, my friend was like, okay, well, what did you put down for this answer? Would you go rescue your friend? And she sheepishly was like, no, I wouldn't go back. And so the friend died in the pit trap, right? Toys and props are fun. That goes back to like Chapel of Grief, where you just go buy like a costume veil or a costume crown, fake jewelry. I love the little like rings you get out of the 25-cent machines. These can be things, again, little tangible items that are memorable for the players. And then finally, papercraft. And this was something that was originally in Tomb of Mercy that Kobold Press cut, which I was a little bummed about. But do you remember the hand that could absorb diseases and conditions?
Yeah.
In that module? So originally, that was actually a hand that you could print out. And you would actually have to write things onto the fingers. And when you use the fingers up, you'd have to tear them off. And you could do different things with it. They unfortunately cut it. It didn't make it into the final module. But that's another example of like, okay, printing out, special papercraft like hands or other shapes or templates, and giving the players something to write or draw on.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That's like 1 page. Why would you cut that?
Yeah, exactly right. Anyway, so I'm sure people are over the lecture at this point. So what I want to do now is really bring you in here. Are there any of these categories of unique mechanics that really jumps out at you as something that like, oh, that would be kind of cool?
Well, I've used a unique mechanic before in something I wrote for 5e a long time ago. I had I love Drow. I hate Drist. I love Drow just because they're evil fucks, right? Yeah. I actually had Loth is like one of my favorites. I had used special tokens and I guess unusual dice where, like Drow society is all based on gaining or losing the favor of the spider goddess, right, Loth? Right. So I had favor and disfavor tokens, which were basically like inspiration tokens, but you could have like multiples if you could earn them, where the players would get a black token if they did something that was super drowy, right. It was a way to really pull them into the way the society works and all that kind of stuff. And they were allowed to basically use it as a reroll. They could just turn in one of the favor tokens and like gain the favor of the goddess, maybe change fate. But if they did something that went against Drow society, like helping their buddy or something instead of like just giving them shit, they would get it, but it was like a red token, but I could take it from them to spend when I wanted to, and it was a disfavor token, so I could make them re-roll a roll that I wanted to make them roll.
Yeah.
But I had these dice where they're artisan dice, like right there. It's 3 dice. 1 was regular. 1, they took the number 1 off, so there were 2 20s. And on 1, they took the 20 off, so there were 2 1s.
Oh, I love it.
So whenever they rolled with favor, they got to roll the dice. It had 2 20s, so you got to 10% chance of critical success. And when they rolled with disfavor, I made them roll on the double 1 dice, so they had the 10% chance of critical failure on every single time. So that was a fun way that I've used a unique mechanic, especially special tokens, before. So those are always fun to me. I feel like though, like the unique token ones, like for that specific example, like I like the way that lineage really worked in Necropolis. For this though, man, I don't know. So I guess my issue with toys and props is like that's an added potential cost, I guess, that, or if people have, if they really want to do something. I love the idea of paper craft, but I think if we did that for this adventure, we might need to get like an artist or something on.
You know, one of the things I want to really come back to while you're thinking that over, you talked about the tokens, the favor and disfavor tokens, and how they were rewarded for doing things that were in accordance with, you know, what would be Drow culture or Lolth's, the religion of Lolth. And that is something that I think not just the unique mechanic we're talking about tonight, but all game mechanics really should be doing, is encouraging the kind of behavior that you want the characters to take. And I think that's just a really great example of you're incentivizing through the use of this unique mechanic, the special tokens, characters acting sort of in accordance with what Drow would be doing. So I just wanted to call that out. That's an important thing to take away for people listening. Is think about like what behaviors, what are these special rules going to encourage players to do? So actually, to give another example really quick, in Crucible of the Gods, you know, the prayers were boasts, and you could only really use them when you were about to take an action that was incredibly risky, like almost arrogantly so. That was the point where it's like, I am doing something to essentially point to the gods and say, look at me do this, look how cool I am. And that, you know, resulted in a lot of really interesting and often ill-advised plays, but it was a lot of fun.
Well, so thinking about what, so we're doing some type of corrosion tomb, right?
Yes.
And we decided the tomb is not really, we're trying to stay away from like an overt like Egyptian theme, make it more like the word like mausoleum-y tomb kind of comes into my head a little bit more, with like skeletons and skulls and stuff.
And what you might do is we can go back to our verb list. I'll go ahead and actually, I'll just reshare this with you over Discord really quick. We can look at our verb list and see if anything jumps out at us as being
True.
basis for an interesting unique mechanic. As I mentioned earlier, that's one of the things that unique mechanics can do for you, is give you a way to bring a verb, make it concrete.
So so what jumped into my head was some type of like bone situation where, because I feel like, I mean, I guess when you dip something in acid, you're gonna eat the bones away, I guess, too. But I have this, like, we have skulls, we have skeletons. We talked about potentially having like a giant skull opening its mouth and blasting out like rot or something like that. What if we had like some type of like skull or bones or both, like tokens or something you earn or something like that? Like, I don't want to necessarily say just for dying, but what if well, like we were just talking about, like, do we want to do it to encourage play? Do we want to do it as a reward? Like, do they get tokens every time they die? Do they get tokens to prevent dying?
So we're going to be dialing in on tokens that we want to do, or do we
Well,
want to
that's
do...
the first thing that popped into my head. I don't thinking about other games playing pieces.
Because one of the things we might do, I know you talked about papercraft, and this is another tip for folks listening, is if you're trying to think of interesting, unique mechanics, you can often Google, like, okay, what are some print and play games or activities for parties, or honestly even for kids? So one of the things I'm actually Googling off screen here is like a printable skeleton, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has all the different bones that you might give a kid, like, okay, this is this bone. And for papercraft, you could print it. Like even there's one here that has all the individual bones. Like oh, this is perfect. Yeah, I'm gonna copy this link to you here. Maybe. Um, so it wants to send me to a different website. Come on with this link. Oh my god, it's the same bullshit website. It's just like, all right, well here we go. I'm just gonna send this link to this mom website. We're gonna do some mommy blogging tonight, I suppose. But yeah, any kind of like printable activities. So this is a link to like printable skeleton crafts. It wouldn't let me link you directly to the picture, but if you scroll, there's a number of printable.
Oh yeah, I found something that's like you're talking about like this, like a skeleton cutout situation.
Exactly right, where it has the individual bones that you could print out on a piece of paper. And
I
so that could be something that you can make as you can mechanic. Like, okay, we have these bones, we can collect them to reassemble a skeleton. Potentially, if you've got the corrosion thing, we may need to like etch. So you might give the players the opportunity to draw or write something on those individual bones.
Mhm. I like that. Well, and you're still kind of like tying them. It's printable, but it's still like a token, right?
That's right.
Um, I like that idea. I like that idea. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's nine skeleton bits here. But we could always find one where we chop, um, tibia, fibia, like lower leg, and femur off into different ones. And you could even have foot separate. So you could have up to like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Chop off hand 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 if you really want. I don't know why they split the spine into 2 instead of potentially like 3 with like thoracic and lumbar spine. Interesting way to split the spine, because you could always just make spine one whole one and you'd be at like basically 16, right? So that would be if you recommend for 4 players, that's 4 tokens for 4 players basically, or up to like that could be a good split. 4 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah, so you could do ribs, butt, spine, head, hands, 2 parts of the arms, and then feet and 2 parts of the leg. 16. Okay, all right. I think we're getting somewhere with that. I like the idea. I like that as a kind of a starting spot. And I like the idea of papercraft in this that people can just print out. Because I feel like we've talked about like potentially putting this out on itch. And I think it'd be nice if people were able to just print it directly from itch and just cut out the tokens that are on there.
100%.
And okay, all right. I like the idea of tokens and papercraft. So thinking of what they could earn from tokens, now it comes down to like what do we want the purpose of the tokens to be? Because there were some other mechanics within like Necropolis where you could couldn't you collect skulls within the Necropolis to like turn in basically?
Yeah, you could find trader skulls and trade them in.
Trader skulls.
Yeah. So what we might do, if we bounce back to our verb list, which verb do we want to use as sort of the basis of our unique mechanic? Obviously, exhume and dig up, you could be finding the bones. But, there's a couple other verbs here that I'm looking at that sort of speak to me, but I wanted to give you the first opportunity to share ideas you might have. For like, okay, we have bones. We're presumably the players will be collecting or reassembling them or doing something with them.
Reassembling.
There you go.
So like, well, and then I think of exhume and inhume and everything too. What if, right? There's some, I mean, now we're talking about adventure stuff too. What if some just dumb people, we'll keep it slightly family friendly here, went in and exhumed because we already talked at one point about potentially having like an empty sarcophagus or like some type of trap that's related to an empty sarcophagus. What if people went in and took bits and pieces of skeletons, and like their job is to find the various like skeletons, because maybe there's more than one, and put the pieces back.
I like it. I like that
Like
a lot. That could be sort of
reassemble.
the, that could be like the overall puzzle of the Deathtrap dungeon. Is okay, you get in there and there's like a central sarcophagus. And I'm looking back through our notes too. You know, one of the things we have written down is like a sarcophagus filled with like rusted iron bones. So the bones could be made of iron.
On top of that, so my thought too, so corrosion is like the second word.
Yeah.
But I don't think corrosion isn't necessarily like, what am I trying to say? Like the tomb of corrosion doesn't hit me as much as like decay or rot. I was thinking of like, because we have all of these corrosion bits, and I think using all of them within the dungeon, because we can use them all and have similar like they're all similar in that they all corrode, but in different ways. I was wondering if should we have one type be like kind of like the primary thing, and then people will notice the different other versions are basically like different versions of that. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Like if we wanted to do like Tomb of Rot, right? So
right.
Rot is kind of like the overarching theme, but within Rot, we know that could be what we considered, or decay is like, you know, kind of corrosion. So a lot of the traps will be like corrosion themed, and will tie into at least like a feeling of similarity within the dungeon. But do we want to pick one of these to be like the overarching, like basically like Tomb of Acid or Tomb of Rot or something like that?
Right.
You know? And I personally think rot and decay goes well with the whole bone situation, because it kind of has to, well, not has to, but like rotting away to get to the bones kind of feels good to me.
And that can, I'm going to spitball here because again, for those who may be tuning in for the first time, a lot of this stream / podcast will be us sort of freestyling ideas. Two things come to mind. First is that can tie into a time limit, which we'll talk about later in this series. So there may be, okay, the bones have been exhumed. They are rotting away. You need to move quickly to gather them back up before they completely rot to nothing. Related to that, the skeleton could be assembled at the very beginning. And so they have all the different pieces of this papercraft skeleton laid out on the table. And as, let's say, every 30 minutes of real time, they have to pick a bone that rots away. And depending on which bone they pick, that causes some problems for them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So it becomes sort of like a countdown clock, but it puts the choice, and choices will be one of the episodes we do later, but it essentially forces the player into this dilemma choice of, okay, we're wasting too much time. We hit another 30-minute timer. We got to pick a bone, and you might even have written on the bones like, okay, the hand does this. If you get rid of one of the hands, this is something that gets worse in the dungeon, right? And ultimately, you want to try as long as you can to not get rid of the skull, right? The skull is the last to go.
What if also so that's straight like punishment, right? Like basically like, but what if there's like almost a reward element to some of the pieces too, where like maybe it almost gives him like a little bit of a boost or something, or like a special ability that they can use while they still possess it that might help them in certain areas. Yeah.
So you start off with essentially an ability, and then I like that a lot.
Well, because the other thing too is instead of doing 16 pieces, we could break the skeleton into, well, I mean, it depends. Well, and the other thing too is we don't have to have a full skeleton, because maybe if we want, there can be multiple skeletons, right?
Ooh,
that like not every piece of each one is missing. So instead of finding like one, or like you have to find the sarcophagus that has the bones that you're missing. So you might even find a sarcophagus and it might not be missing the right arm that you're holding. And
Oh, I love
then
it.
so it could be mixed like that. And then that way, when you are having to choose to basically like have a bone rot away, if we give them the choice, they have to not only kind of pick in their head like which when we lose one, how might it hurt us, but also
Yeah,
what like bonus do we lose? Like do we think that the bonus we got from the hand is really good right now and we should hold on to that, or we think the bonus from the foot is better right now?
exactly right. Yeah, I mean, and those are the kinds of the interesting choices that a unique mechanic hopefully introduces into a death trap dungeon. I love
Right.
it. I'm making some notes here. Some other ideas I've got kind of floating around is giving the players the opportunity at the start of the game, if they start with any bones, to write maybe like a word, like etch a verb on there, etch some kind of adjective, just basically, or even I'm thinking, I know that you're a big fan of one word spell casting systems.
Yeah, I've toyed around with it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of a, you
I've
know,
tried. Yeah.
tried it. And so what you might even do is give the players at the start of the game an opportunity to write a one-word spell onto a bone, and
Mhm.
then they could either use up the bone to use that spell, or it may grant them an ability when it's appropriate. So let's say one of them is like, I don't know, fly, and they get to a chasm. It's like, oh, hey, we have the fly bones we can cross, but if they lost it or it rotted away, then they're going to take a harder path. You know what I'm saying? I'm just kind of freestyling it here, but I always
Well,
like giving the
what if
players opportunities to, with papercraft, to like either write or color in or draw on the actual printed out thing.
what if too? Also, just to make it easier for some people, because some people get that like paralysis of choice kind of thing, where it's
Yeah,
like, well, not only can I write anything on this, but the GM has to like, kind of figure out how I'm going to make that work within the game, right? What if
yeah.
we did, uh, what if we did roll tables of
Roll tables are fun.
stuff,
They're solid. Yeah.
um, where we say like roll on the arm table, or roll on the leg table, or roll on the skull table, and we can actually just give them like a d6, or I'm going to say d6 because this is a lot of things we'd have to come up with, of
Yeah.
what spell or ability you gain. So not only do they potentially get a bonus for each one, right, or they will
Yeah.
be getting a bonus, plus like we can actually have the inverse of that bonus um be like the issue for them later, right? So like if you
Hmm.
get fly, at some point,
Yeah.
or like sprint or whatever, haste or something, maybe like if when
Ooh,
that bone rots away, like your movement is actually slowed or something.
I like it. And
Or like you
especially,
can only do like one thing in combat, like you don't get like an action and a free, you know what I mean, like you can only move or attack in combat depending on what system you're using, something like that.
yeah. And I'm thinking too with like the roll tables, you split the bones into broad categories. Okay, the arm slash hand, those have to deal with more offensive things like combat
Mhm.
and grasping and reaching. And with the legs, it could be escaping or movement or flight. And you've got the skull, so it's like
Yes.
intelligence or special sight. The rib cage can be broadly considered as like resilience. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of even keying
Yeah.
at different ability scores.
Yeah.
And then one of
what
the
are
other
we
ideas
uh
too,
what are we doing for the butt though? What do butt bones get us?
I mean, that's charisma, baby.
I
you
mean,
know?
very true, very true. All right, we got it.
Um, but one of the other ideas here that I've been kind of sketching out is there's some sort of central
Oh,
sarcophagus in the very beginning of the adventure. It's sort of the hub of the level. And let's say the bones are all laid out in this like in this sarcophagus. The players can come back to it and say, you know what? I need to take this bone from you, God or goddess. Thank you for your help. And then you grab the bone and it gets used up, and then they get some kind of temporary ability. You know what I mean? Again, these are all different ideas that we can refine later, but hopefully, because I do want to maybe pause for a second and catch up with chat. But do you, Ryan, do you feel like, again, the wheels are sort of turning here and you're kind of
Oh
getting an
yeah,
understanding
yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
why
yeah, yeah.
these unique mechanics are helpful?
Yeah, well, not only the unique mechanic is super helpful, but the way like we're incorporating last week in this week too, where it's like, well,
Right.
let's go back to the verbs we decided and let's go with something like that. So one of the things Chad did say, one of the things Janelle said, remember the another thing I like too, a unique mechanic that we came up with during when we redid that Cobalt Press dungeon was the canopic jar room. The gravity room
Yeah.
became that one where I had a real 15-minute timer playing, and I literally told them, I was like, I'm not kidding, this isn't a joke, the campaign will end if you guys don't make it out of this room by the time the 15-minute timer is up. You all die, there's no escape.
Right.
And then they had to figure out that based on clues they had to chop a different of their own body part off, not like IRL, but in game,
Yeah. I
to
wish.
figure out, what to unlock these jars. When they were all unlocked, the door would open. So they're all chopping bits and pieces off themselves, so they figured it out. But what the piece that they chopped off was actually nailed to the BBEG's big monster in the last room.
Oh, that's right. I forgot
Because
about that.
yeah, when they chopped off the finger, they actually lost a point to like dexterity. When they chopped off, or like strength or something, and when they chopped off a toe, it was a point of or they had disadvantage on dexterity, then they had disadvantage on strength, they had disadvantage on like intelligence. When they chopped off the tongue, they couldn't cast spells, things like that, and they were nailed to the bad guy. One of the things Janelle just said is, as soon as you write the ability on the bone, the BBEG at the end gains that spell.
I love it. That is absolutely awesome.
Janelle, look at you coming through. Yeah, I
Once
think
again.
that's great. I really think we're on to something here. I really like this.
So one of the things I want to do is jump back over to our jam board
Mm-hmm. All right.
and go to the final slide here. So we've got a general idea of what our unique mechanic is going to be. We have some kind of papercraft skeleton. We cut it apart, the bones, and we can refine this sort of later, but the bones have some benefit when they're present. They're rotting away, or they might be consumed or given up. What we're going to do now is we're going to tie this mechanic to various elements in the Deathtrap dungeon.
Uh-huh.
So I have here 6 different sticky notes: monster, trap, hazard, puzzle, NPC, and treasure. And what we're going to do for the remainder of this episode, and again, chat, feel free to toss your excellent ideas into the mix. But we're going to go through each of these one by one and brainstorm ideas for how we can design, a monster, trap, hazard, etc., that in some way interacts with the uh, unique mechanic. So to give an example really quick, in the my Dungeon 23 module for February, I mentioned the poison gas tokens. And in the very first room, they're in a kind of a large chamber filled with rows and rows of clay warriors, right? Sort of these warriors in jaguar masks and loincloths, and they have special spears. And one of the things that clay golems are sort of known for, I think this even goes back to the original editions of D&D, is that when they hit you, their wounds are cursed, so they don't heal
No doubt.
unless you
Okay.
do some kind of remove curse. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to take these initial monsters, because for me, like, the first encounter really needs to set the stage for the rest of the module and really interact with the unique mechanics. I changed that power a little bit, where if they are struck by the spear of these like clay jaguar masked women, the wounds don't heal until they escape from the poisonous gas, because only half the temple is full of poison gas.
Right.
So that creates an incentive for them. It's like, okay, we need to really get moving here, because the more the poison gas builds up, I can't heal unless the poison gas is all gone.
All right.
And so related to that, there was a trap in the next room where there's like a super long hallway, and there are hundreds and hundreds of cubby holes in these walls that have murals in them. And the players have a choice where they can stay and rifle through these hundreds of cubby holes that have grave goods in them. They roll on a random table. For the most part, they'll just find worthless garbage like beads and teeth and things like that. But there is a chance that they could find either scrolls that are unique to that adventure. So, for example, there's a scroll that's a scroll of protection from felines, which is a rare item they can find. Or they can find a puzzle artifact that'll help them later in the adventure. They'll get like an optional reward. But the trade off is every time they make an attempt to search all the cubby holes, they use up time, I get another poison gas token, right?
Mm.
So that's kind of the things that we're going to be brainstorming for our unique mechanic is how do we design, it doesn't have to be super complicated, but just how can we design something that ties into the mechanic? Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. 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 Um, Gosh, I think what I first go to in my head is the list of um like spell types we're gonna use, right?
Yeah.
Or abilities or bonuses or whatever. Like, because it doesn't have to be like a spell; it could just be like a bonus in some type of way or something, right? But just whatever that is, whether it's a spell or not, is if we're gonna have, like something combat oriented, something intelligence oriented, things like that, we should tie the whatever the bonus might be. I think the overarching theme of that bonus, like say skull, for example, intelligence, perception, whatever, mind,
Yeah.
there should be like mind traps or puzzles where having
Right.
it would help you and not having it would suck.
That's right.
So we could tie the bonuses we give them directly to the traps and hazards. Even to the point with maybe some of the ones that aren't like, up to the BBG could almost be avoided by having, if you still have that skeleton bit or bone or something like that.
Oh, absolutely. And if we tie it to an actual time limit, like say every 30
Mhm.
minutes of real time, a
Right.
bone disappears, what you're essentially doing is the dungeon is getting harder the longer you
Yeah.
take, right?
Yeah. 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 What's interesting too
Um,
is we could depending on how good we are, and you're pretty darn good, we could try to set the actual physical dungeon up in a way where if they move quick enough, they'll have access to all of the traps, most likely. You know what I mean?
yeah,
With while having the skeleton. But if they get delayed or mess up or something, then the one that they need, that might be the one that they decide to lose first. Like, we might be where they have to like do a loop or whatever, and if they don't do that loop
mhm,
quick enough, then they'll probably say, okay, well then we're gonna lose the butt first. We don't really need charisma, and then once they loop back around, they'll be like, oh shit, we got rid of the one we needed right now. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Feels a little railroady, but but it just, but the other thing is they could pick any path that they want. It could just be like,
yeah,
if they go this way, let's hope that they didn't get rid of the arm first, right? Or that they do, you know?
yeah. I mean, it's almost like a reverse Crucible of the Gods, where in that module, like you had a number of different wings, and each one was themed around a different god, and you could tackle them in any order, and depending on which ones you defeated, you would claim the crystal skull of that god, and when you placed
Mhm.
it in the central hub, it would give you a boon. We're kind of doing the reverse here, where it's like, okay, you've got a number of different paths that are open to you, and you start off with these boons, but as time goes on, more of these boons disappear, making certain wings more difficult, and so you have to think to yourself, okay, which wing do we want to tackle first? And we know that we're going to lose one. You know what I'm saying? Like, it creates this interesting prioritization problem. And that's actually, I'll use this opportunity to pitch, or I'm sorry, not pitch, but like sell people on another really good book. It's by Jeff Warrender, and it's You Said This Would Be Fun: What Makes a Game Good and How to Make a Good Game. And there's a really
Talk about
great
that a lot.
chapter. Yeah, there's a really great chapter that talks about the different kinds of skills that you can challenge in players. And actually, it could be good inspiration for creating your own unique mechanic. And there's some of them, it's like prioritization problems. Some of them are more social, like social guessing, like is somebody bluffing. But yeah, there's a number of different skills, reflexes, like auctioning and bargaining, those kinds of things. But in this case, it really feels like our unique mechanic is testing the player's ability to prioritize. So, we have this limited resource. We know it's going to decay over time. So how do we plan the optimal route, right?
Well, the other possibility too that popped into my head, besides starting with them, what if there are 4 sarcophagus spread throughout the dungeon? Right. And let's say that story-wise, before this thing started, people went down into this thing and took bones from these things, like iron bones covered in rust or whatever we're going to do with it. What if something came out and took them back, right? What if they didn't take back like the right ones, basically? So what if skeleton A, you have to actually get to skeleton A's coffin, but grasped in their hand is like the leg of skeleton C.
Oh boy, yeah.
So you have to actually find each one, take that one, thereby gaining its bonus, and then go find the one it belongs to. So we'll actually be having them like loop-de-loop-de-loop like numerous times, backtracking and trying to get back to the correct one. But obviously, like, when you get to skeleton A, you'll see its right leg is missing, but it's holding a left arm. When you get to skeleton C and you see, it's holding a right leg or a left arm, but not a right leg, they'll know, but they're not going to get it dead on the first time. So they're going to have to loop to the skeletons multiple times. So that just, brings up the question, do we just have them start with it as if instead, story-wise, people took the bones and then the town became cursed? So they're like, hey, can you go put these back? Because then you could do the same thing. Like, they find skeleton A. I think I like that better. I think everything I said was dumb. I think I like better that they have to put them back, but they're all jumbled up. It's kind of the same thing, but they get to start with the bonus instead. They find, skeleton A, but it's not missing the part that they have. And then they have to go find skeleton C or Z. It still creates the back loop, but makes them start with it instead of end with it. What are your thoughts on those two options?
Yeah, the thing that jumps to mind here, another book that I'll recommend to people, and I'll be recommending a lot of books throughout this series. It's a book by Jeffrey with like Geo, Jeffrey Engelstein. And the book is called Achievement Relocked, Loss Aversion in Game Design. Basically what it does is it talks about the psychological phenomenon of loss aversion, and how it relates to games is that players typically feel a stronger emotional reaction to the threat of losing something they have than the potential of getting a reward. So basically, for something like a Deathtrap dungeon where we want it to feel very tense, what we might try to favor is give players something and then threaten them with the potential loss of that thing, because that's going to create a stronger emotional reaction and create more tension than the dangling a potential reward in front of them. So why I bring that up is I wonder if that could be our concept to fall back on. Like, okay, let's start the players off with bones and have it be a resource that they would really prefer not to use up or lose, because we can tap into that psychological that loss aversion. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. That makes more sense to let them start with it and then regret losing it versus like, hey, go find a thing. Because then I feel like if they have to go find it, pick it up, and then go put it somewhere else, I don't feel like I wouldn't feel like I really feel like I had it. You know what I mean?
Right.
I feel like I'd just be more like transporting a thing to a thing. And if I happen to get a bonus while doing it versus starting with it, getting to roll for what it is, it's now mine. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you could almost even have it where it like replaces their body part or something.
Ooh, I love
Like
it.
wild transporting.
Oh, that's so cool. And one of the things too is I think you've talked about this maybe on other streams you've done, but like the idea of clocks in games. And I
Yes.
think that unique mechanics, I mean, they don't always have to be uh function as sort of a game clock, but in this case, I feel like the the papercraft bones on the table are a very good and very frightening, intense visual representation of time ticking away. So as you're taking
Yeah.
bones off the table, oftentimes if you've got the uh, a safe enough space for it. Like we burn things in candles, right? Like, okay, we take the piece of the bone, we toss it in a little candle and it burns up. Um, similar with the poison gas tokens I talked about from my upcoming Dungeon 23 module, where it's like, okay, as time is going on and as players are making certain choices, I'm just stacking more and more of these green poker chips on the table. And it's a very visual
Right.
representation of like, oh man, we need to really get a move on here because it's just going to get worse if we linger. So what I want to do, I want to jump back to the jam board here because I want to start getting into some specifics for each of these different categories of dungeon elements. So for now, we've got a lot of really great ideas. I've been trying to take down notes in our Google Doc that we can come back to and refine later. But for now, let's just say, okay, we have some sort of papercraft skeleton. The bones are
Mhm.
split up into different categories, and the players they want the bones. They want to have those bones and not lose them.
One last idea I just had, then I'll stop talking. We
Yeah, let's
talked
hear it.
about when the bone fades away, the players lose it, and the BBG gains the power. But I am kind of imagining the Home Depot skeleton, and what if they actually gain that thing? If it is some type of giant skeleton, like what if you know if both arms like uh, rot away. When they get to the BBG, instead of two arms, it has four arms,
See,
or
I love
like
it.
a third leg, a second head if the skull goes. So like
Yeah.
you actually see the thing you lost, and it powered up the bad guy at the end, but like visually, and you can even see like maybe even the spell like carved across its forehead or something on the one that you lost.
That's awesome. And that goes back to one of the principles of good unique mechanic or gimmick design. And it's something that, Janelle called out in the chat is when you have this unique mechanic that is threaded through different elements of the dungeon, it just happens to feel more cohesive. So you have this thing, it sort of bookended it in the case of Dark Kingdoms, where sort of the beginning of that dungeon level, you had this interesting uh, you know, cutting off your body parts. And then when you got to the end, you saw, oh, this is the body parts are on the boss monster. And it creates this satisfying sense of setup and payoff. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, 100%.
So, monster. So, let's think about some ideas for monsters that would appear in the dungeon that would have some kind of unique ability. And this could be either positive for the players or negative. So, for example, like killing a monster gets you a bone, or the opposite is the monster does something to either take bones away from the player or complicate the use of the bones power. You know what I'm saying?
Mm. Um. So
And I got my notes here. We
Yeah,
got
I
Sarcophagus
feel like
Golem.
we
We've got
have. Yeah, I feel like we have pretty much got got boned up with this dungeon. I feel
that's
like
right.
that feels like the direction we're really going is very bony. Um, so sarcophagolem gives me bone vibes because we could have a fake sarcophagus. They think they found one. They go to open it to put a bone in. Boom! It's not a. It's a sarcophagolem. It's not a
Hmm.
sarcophagus with a skeleton. That's a possibility.
I like that. So like a fake out mimic type
Basically, yeah, like a mimic one. Yeah.
sarcophagolem.
Hmm.
So we've also got
Um.
let's see here. We have skeleton and armor that breathes rust and rot. We have a spider that's covered in with like a myconid spider
Hmm.
or a spider blooded with mushrooms. The patina ghost. Yeah, we got a couple options here for what we might do.
So do we want to? So we did a lot of verbs, but we don't technically have to use all of them, but we can obviously. Do we
Yeah.
feel like bone and rot versus like rust? Do we feel like that's too disparate? Will we be mixing themes too much if we do a lot of like rusting away versus rotting away, or do you think it's okay to tie those two in together?
Yeah. I mean, the idea is you want to try to create as much of a mixture as possible.
Okay.
And the thing with rot in particular, although I want to include elements of it, I think what makes the tomb plus corrosion combination interesting is that it does get away from rot a little bit, because rotting and decay in the like the decomposition sense is pretty similar to tomb. Like that's something that you would think would go together,
Right, 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 right,
whereas
right.
corrosion forces us to come up with, more interesting elements.
So I like the idea then of really incorporating like iron bones. Either even if the bones aren't entirely made of iron, what if they're
Yeah.
somehow like a mix of both? As if, kind of in like a, Wolverine-ish kind of way. They're either coated partially in iron or are literally just somehow part iron, part bone.
Oh, like a weird alloy, like a bone steel alloy. That's like a magic
Yeah.
card.
Like I almost imagine like the skull itself, it's like bone, but then half of it somehow is like when they first get it, it's just all rust. And if they scrape rust away, they find iron underneath. And it's like, how is this skull
Yeah,
like half iron, half bone? That's a question they can ask. We don't have to answer it,
that's
but
right.
that will actually bring in both rot and rust in that the flesh had to rot from the bones. And then once it exposed the iron, it started to rust.
I love it.
So then having the rust skeletons and
Hmm.
or the skeleton knight that breathes rusting gas is a great monster to have in here. Um, and then I feel like the patina ghost is great. Again, iron and bone and undeath. Um, the same answer then. The only one that we really got kind of mushroomy with was the spider myconid. Is
Right.
that going one too far, or could that just be like a little corner of it, maybe in like a moist area? There could even be some like water stuff there, and um that's why we have kind of like a fungus section. It doesn't have to be like a massive theme, but it could just be like one little section if they find gets fungal, and we can explain it with some type of like water hazard.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We can definitely take, some of these elements and not necessarily foreground them, right? Like they're sort of a
Mm,
secondary, adding a little spice here and there to add diversity to
yeah.
the different areas. I really like this idea of the sort of like the sarcophagus, or even like, yeah, I'm picturing like it appears like a normal sarcophagus in which they could put the bones or take the bones, but then when they go up to it and put a bone in there, it basically sprouts arms and legs and just goes ham on the players, right?
Yeah, and you have to, and like in almost a preview of the BBEG, right?
Yeah.
It gains the ability of the bone you stick in it.
There you go. Now
Um,
we're talking.
but and you have to defeat the thing to get the bone back. But that also makes me wonder, like, are they going to be able to open the sarcophagus and see the skeleton to decide what bone to stick in, or are they just having to find a sarcophagus and stick a bone in? I feel like they would need to like open it up, but then there could be, do we think there could potentially be then just like a fake skeleton inside, like they stick the bone in and the skeleton just like almost like puffs into like rust dust, or like
Yeah.
is just, or it could even just be a visual illusion, like if they touch it, like it
Hmm.
won't be there. They could almost like, and if they actually were to somehow like do that first, maybe they don't stick a bone in, and as soon as they go, oh, we don't think this is right, then it pops up and it doesn't gain that ability that they could have got from having the bone. Though there's an option where they could accidentally power it up by putting a bone in, but if they're smart, they might not.
I mean, there's a lot of possibilities here.
Okay.
So I love all of those ideas. What we might do is, you know, just kind of get these notes out. And that's how often I work, or just just try to get as many ideas on paper, because you
Mhm.
can always go back and refine.
Right.
And
I'm looking
you
at
know,
your things here. Yeah, so monster fake out, mimic, sarcophagolem. Love that. Skeleton breathes rusting gas that corrodes bones, gains the ability of the bone you stick in there. Yep. So that's all. I mean, that's a monster and a trap, kind of, right? Like, I've always seen mimics as a bit of both.
hmm yeah,
Okay.
there's definitely some overlap between, and I think this is a good segue into trap, right? So
Okay.
we want
Yeah.
to create a trap where either its harmful effect complicates the bonesmanship of the players in some way, or it's a
Bonesmanship.
trap that yeah, their bonesmanship, or it's a trap that, if overcome, like potentially grants the players some sort of either a bone to take or augments the abilities they get from the bones. For traps in particular, I think for this one, is for the sake of ease, let's focus on a harmful effect. So an idea for a trap that fits the theme of the dungeon. We've got our verbs here. So, I'm looking at like embalm, a trap that embalms, decaying and rot, dissolving, engraving, oxidizing, weathering. Um, you want to pick a verb as our trap and see where that goes?
I do. I do real quick because I'm sorry, my ADHD is hitting me. I know one of the things you told me to kind of think about was potentially like a name for
Yes.
this. And since we're getting all bony, um, I two things that popped into my head were the words ossuary
I like it.
and
One of my
and
favorites.
charnel, yeah, and charnel house.
Ooh,
And the charnel house is a vault or building where human skeletal remains are stored.
official title. So put these keywords in here: ossuary, charnel house, and yeah, we mix in there a couple words that relate to the
Yeah,
corrosion theme, and we got
yeah,
ourselves a
yeah. Even just the word charnel, like somehow, even if we don't use charnel house because it's a tomb, but even just the
yeah,
word charnel means like a common repository of dead bodies and a repository for bones. Like, I
love it.
love like somehow using the word charnel in there. Um, but yeah, so we're talking about a trap. I think so when we were doing the verbs, there were a couple that we really really liked. I loved the uh weather exposure one. Immediately said trap to me.
I like it.
Um and the preserve protect, I like tied into that in my head. Maybe that could be two different traps, but I think we talked about potentially preserve protect for that, like the urn of the grave wax that like protects the players in some way or protect something inside in some way. Um, but the weather exposure one immediately said trapped me in that, especially with the oxidizing rust aspect of it. What they could like, they could see a room. Maybe it could be one of those things where, like, in part of the cyclic dungeon stuff, where you can like see the room, but you can't
Yeah,
access it yet. But when they see it, they see like some type of like exposure, like something's all rusted out or whatever, and they realize that like they have to go through there, but they have to figure out how to like not get that first. Where maybe if they start to go through the room, anything metal on them starts to like rust out just from something in the room. Maybe it's an item in the middle or something like that. So that could
yeah,
be, feels a little bit more like a hazard than a trap, though.
yeah. Well, we can just type in hazard and just kind of go with that for now.
Mm,
Um, so sort of like a oxidizing or weathering, corroding uh, hazard in a room that can be seen early on. Players got to figure out a way to safely pass. Is kind of what you're thinking, right?
that's, yeah, that's what popped in my head. Is like, I just imagine like if I walked into some like weird, well lit room that either
hmm
looked completely normal with like nothing in there, or where everything in there is completely rotted out. I almost like the idea more of it like being like just a completely freaking empty room where maybe like if they look close enough at the floor, they see some pieces of something that are like rotted out, like
Yeah.
maybe some like some piece of like rusted out chainmail. So it's not super obvious, but like if they look around, they can notice that any of the metal in the room seems to be rusted out.
Like
It could even be like skeleton or like statues and stuff or whatever, but there's like maybe there's bits and pieces of metal in there. They statues seem fine, but all of the metal in there is like rusted to the point of falling apart, and they're like, why? Like what's different? And then they
hmm
step in and like their sword starts to like rot away or like rust away or
yeah.
something.
And I love it. And that can key back to potentially like, okay, you got to find protective wax to, you know, safely carry the bones that you find through or back through the.
Oh yeah, the bones are
Mhm.
iron.
That's right.
You would have to basically like find the wax to coat your armor and weapons in the bones to be able to walk through the room.
hmm And what we might do, we'll talk more about this in a future episode, but the hazard might block off retreat, so it's safe when the players move through it.
Hmm.
But then it becomes like a valve, and
Hmm.
then the players essentially, if they want to return back to safety to rest or replace more bones they found, they'll have to find some way to protect themselves when they pass back through. Right? That's
Well,
a
they
pattern we'll
could.
talk about kind of later in the series.
Well, the wax could be single use,
Mhm.
so they wouldn't have the wax to go back through. They would either have to find more or find some way to shut the effect off from the other side.
That's right. To pass through, and it could be not enough wax for all the bones. So
Ooh.
they have to
So
decide,
then,
okay, which do we want to protect and which do we want to, and you might even make it like um a risky roll. Again, we'll talk about this in one of the future episodes, like different dungeon crawl moments. But you might say, okay, you can protect, let's say there's 5 bones, you can protect 3 of them.
mhm.
So the 2 that you don't protect, rather than having them just automatically destroyed, you turn that into a dramatic roll where it's like, okay, bones left exposed, have to make an item saving throw, right?
Right. The other thing too, if the bones are an important part of the dungeon and we're already having ways where they could potentially lose all of them, we could also say that there's not enough wax for like all the bones plus all of your armor and weapons.
Oh, I like
Like
that. So you might have to
every,
say, will you put
yeah,
your own items at risk?
yeah. So basically, like you can protect all the bones plus like 4 other items or something. So basically, it's like there's enough wax for you to coat either like the armor you're wearing or the weapon you're holding, but not both.
I love it. Absolutely love it. So I think we've got some really solid notes for the hazard. This is
Okay.
super cool. I'm already feeling the juices flowing. Let's bounce back to trap here. So a
Okay.
more like explicitly designed trap. And actually, if you want to, I can roll on my random trap table and see
Yeah, hell yeah.
what I
Let's
come
do
up
that.
with.
And let's
All
let's do
right,
that, and then we can tie it back to some of the things that are here.
awesome. Well, let me pull it up here. I won't pull it up on stream because can't. I don't have it up publicly yet. But let me go ahead and why don't you roll for me a D4 and a D6, or maybe the chat can roll a D4 and a D6 if they
Yeah,
are
if
feeling
someone
it the
does
most.
exclamation point D4 and someone else's exclamation point D6, in my head, real quick, too, tying stuff together with what we're talking about, we talked about potentially maybe there's some type of water trap because we talked about like the ash plus water erosion. So there could be some type of like ash like creature or something mixed with like the water or some way. But we also talked about potentially having a little section be like fungusy. So
Ooh,
that could
yeah,
be because of the water dripping through creates like a more damp area. That could be where spider or myconid thing is mixed with the ash of something above it. Could also tie into some type of water trap or water hazard in an area too.
yeah.
Ash plus water equals lie. Does it?
I think so. It's like soap, right?
Um if that's true, isn't doesn't lie burn?
Look it up. Let's see. Does lime burn? Exposure to sodium hydroxide. Direct contact with the solid or solutions causes thermal and chemical burns. Oh boy.
Boom. So we just tied all of that together into one. We've already talked about ash mixed with water. We're talking about a trap right now. We're talking about a moist area being the spider cobwebby stuff. So if ash and water makes lye can be some type of like caustic. I was gonna say acid, but it's base. But it's so
Right.
base that it's caustic.
Yeah.
That could be used in some type of trap. And we also have the acid dust.
Ooh, I love it.
So I mean, it
do
could
we
be
do we get
basic dust. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we got D4 and D6. I need to take my Adderall before the next episode. So on a D4, we got a 3. And on the D6, we got a 4.
Oh, this will be fun. This is magic mouth. So some sort of magic mouth that appears as a trap. So it could scream, it could say something, speak a power word. But yeah, basically a summoned mouth appears in, an area to be determined.
Uh-huh.
So what, you have a flash of inspiration. You sounded like you.
Well, we have a note right here. We have a note right here that says giant skull that opens mouth and releases rusting gas.
Oh, there we go.
It's already in the notes.
Giant skull that opens up, and we could say like it, releases a bladder of water into an urn of ash, creating let's put like a lye flood or lye burst, and that can potentially dissolve the bones. I love it.
That's what's up. That's what's
That's good
up.
stuff.
And then the lye, we have a whole section of the dungeon that has like we said, like the ashes plus water erosion, eroded open stone urns, mixed ash with iron flecks. Well, now we know we can't mix ash and iron flecks to Broomhome tea if it's gonna make like a lye tea.
Unless you find a way to resist it.
Yeah. Combine ashes with water and heat to make soap to clean corrosion from an ash idol. That's the other thing is you wrote that we could have them have to find some type of like fat within the dungeon somehow. It could be off of some monster. And then they go back, they find the ash, they find the water, they mix it with the whatever thing, and then that could like be used to could also potentially be used to scrub maybe like the rust off the bones or something, maybe like even powering them up or cleaning something else. Like this has clean the corrosion off an ash idol. We definitely have like a whole corner of the dungeon worked out just by that.
Yeah, I love it. And that kind of leads us to what I want to do is head over to the next notes here, because we're going to move away from threats and now towards rewards, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the next one we have here is puzzle. And so what I mean by that is we have a puzzle that rewards the players for solving it. And this reward relates to our unique mechanic in some way. So let's think about, we don't have to design a puzzle right now, but let's focus on a reward for solving a puzzle, right?
Well, we've tied in a lot of the bone stuff, right? Like the getting the bones isn't a reward for the puzzle. Could there be some way to extend the time on the bones? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like the reward could be pick a bone, you get an extra, or like you like reset the timer or add 5 more minutes to the timer or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking at, for instance, like the verbs consecrate or even embalm, like by maybe consecrating an area in the correct way can allow the bones to last a little longer, right?
What if it even makes one of the bones immune? What
See, I
if
like that. I like that a
what
lot.
if what if they gain some type of like wrapping or something,
Ooh,
like
yeah,
soaked in something or coated in something that they can wrap around the bone, that like just it this one bone becomes immune to the rotting effect of the dungeon or something.
I love it. And that can lead to, I think for the puzzle, I'm just gonna put one of our verbs. So like, I like lore puzzles, so like having the players dig into the lore of the dungeon. We'll talk about this more
Yeah,
in a
yeah,
later
yeah,
episode,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna put like feel like consecrate or exercise or embalm. Like which one of those really jumps out at you as like a
I like so I imagine bombing very like like medically, and that like sucking out the people juice, putting in and
yeah,
like coating it and wrapping it. But I think consecrate, I think the consecrate slash embalm, because in my mind I imagine some type of like consecrated, maybe like fabric or material
yeah,
or wrapping.
I
um
love it.
because, well, it also comes down to, do we want to use like almost like a wrapping, or do we want to somehow use like pages? I know you love, and I love um pages, paper, as like like creatures, or like I know in um oh my gosh, why am I blanking on it? Tomb of Mercy. One of the big baddies in that has like, aren't they like wrapped in some type of paper?
They
The
are.
girl
It's
in the
wrapped
room
in.
with the
Yeah, the exalted mummy is wrapped in the Book of Exalted Deeds.
yes, yeah, 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 that kind of thing. So my idea is to either have some type of either pages or papers from some type of like maybe consecrated text or something.
I love it.
Or they could find maybe like lore bits, let's say like a statue or something to like a fallen goddess or something, but like on her is like some material, whether it's like a scarf or a headpiece or something like that, that's like physical, that they can take and wrap the bone in.
I love it. Yeah, that's
Uh-huh.
super cool. I think even scroll was one of our materials.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
in the interest of time, what I would like to do, I'm going to skip the treasure one for now, since we kind of talked
Okay,
about that a little bit with the wrappings. I want to go to NPC.
okay.
So I want to design a friendly or at least open to negotiation NPC that is in some way related the um, to the unique mechanics. So I mean, my first idea, I love the crypt thing monster, like the skeleton that sits on a throne and just talks to the players. That, for example, they could say, "Hey, I need to borrow that bone real quick," but in doing so, they destroy the crypt thing or make it mad and it becomes hostile. But I don't know, what are your thoughts when you think about NPC and our sort of our bone mechanic here?
I love that idea. And the other one that popped in my head is like, I feel like there's this like potentially like two level lore situation working in this dungeon. Because I really dig this idea of this like fallen goddess or something that can like consecrate against, like maybe she lost to whatever, maybe not even a goddess, maybe just like a high priestess or something, but like of the goddess or something. But like maybe she lost to this like corroding rust iron monster thing or whatever. But there's lore involved where, like I said, like her fabric or something can protect the bones, right? What if there's like a fallen priest or priestess to her somewhere in here?
Love it. Absolutely
You
love
know,
it. So
they can
fallen,
give you a little bit more flavor. They can kind of direct you towards maybe like the area that you can like consecrate the things or something. Maybe they can no
yeah,
longer enter the area. They're not worthy anymore. It's one of those like, I still worship her, but I'm never going to get back in her good graces kind of situations.
exactly. Oh, I love it. Yeah, and that
I love the crypt keeper idea though, of maybe like I imagine like a little like some dark humor with that, like you just said, like a lot of like just we could have like cheesy bone jokes in there too,
Oh,
you
man.
know?
Yeah, and I'm thinking of like a choice where, like the priestess, okay, you can talk to her. You can get kind of like a lesser version. Like, okay, we lost the right arm, for example, but we really, really need it. So we can go, hey, I want to borrow your right arm, and you get some sort of like
Ooh,
lesser temporary. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of an ersatz. Like,
yeah.
okay, yeah. So we covered a lot of ground tonight. I know we're running up on time here. I wanted to give Chad an opportunity to ask any questions that they wanted to put to either of us before we wrap up. Um, and then we can really quickly talk about what's coming up for next episode. So first, does
Um,
Chad have any questions for what
well,
we talked about tonight?
Janelle says jars. We love jars.
Hmm.
So instead of some type of like, I'm thinking with that, maybe instead of some type of like wrapping on the consecrated bone, maybe in a different way. I know we talked about using the grave wax before, but one of the things that we talked about was some type of urn with protective wax.
Hmm.
So there could always be, instead of like consecrated it in a wrapping, we could always have them put the bone inside an urn
I like
sealed
it.
with protective wax. Janelle asked a very serious, very hard hitting question here. Why, Sersa, do you gotta be so brilliant?
Oh, I appreciate that. Especially tonight. I think both you and I, our ADHD is really, really acting up.
Ooh, I
Um,
gotta wake up early enough to take my Adderall next week because my lack of sleep and ADHD is really having me. You're asking one question, and I'm like, no, wait a minute, let me talk about this thing from 30 minutes ago.
yeah, I
Um,
gotta take my my intuitive here soon. But no, I appreciate that. I'm really, really glad that people find these streams valuable. Like I said, it's less about, me and Ryan showing off and flexing. It's really like, hey, I want people watching to feel like when they sit down to create their own adventure, not even Death Trap dungeon. Like I think a lot of this stuff is useful for adventures of any kind, that they feel like they have a process, they know where to start and have some fun brainstorming activities. So thank you for
yeah,
that compliment. Anything else in the chat? Any other questions that people have, or
I
maybe
don't
something that
think
needs
so.
clarifying?
No.
Cool.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think as we continue with all of these ideas here, I think we'll be able to chop some off and expand on some other ones and continue with the themes going forward. But if that is unique I'm fucking in love with this unique mechanic. To kind of summarize, our idea right now is potentially lore wise. I mean, this could obviously change. Maybe some people from the village went into this place and took some bones out, and then bad shit started happening, and the players are going to be tasked with putting the bones back. But the
Hmm.
bones, while carrying them, will give them some type of boon, but we'll also have a time limit before they dissipate. Like I like the idea of like Necropolis, where basically it's like you have X amount of time or you just fucking die. There's something in here where you just crumple into paper like thing and like dust away. The same thing could be happening with the bones. Like once the bones leave, maybe that's when the rust starts to hit. Right, once they
Yeah.
actually leave. So once they go back in, there's something that'll make the rust like rust it all away. But we're using papercraft as a unique like way to have those tokens where the players will be able to print it and actually roll on tables potentially for bonuses and write it on the bones that they actually have printed out from the papercraft that gives them this unique boon while it is active, but also triggers a timer. I fucking
Hmm.
love that as a unique mechanic. I really love that. I'm super excited for this.
Yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun. Um, so the last thing I'll say, a preview of our next episode, I believe. Ryan, we're on again for next Tuesday, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any Tuesday so far that I'm missing tonight. I do have to go into work. I usually don't work Tuesdays anymore. Um, but yeah, every Tuesday we should be good for the next, however long. But what's coming up next week? What do we got going on? I don't even
Next
remember.
week's gonna be wild. Uh, it, the theme is death, And we're going to talk about this concept of death first design, where essentially before you really do anything else, you just come up with a lot of really interesting ways for characters to die, and you make sure you work those into your module. So next time will be basically me and Ryan just gleefully coming up with
Man,
sort of comically gruesome ways for characters to die.
I
And we'll
wore, I
talk
wore
about
my
sort of
shirt.
the
I wore my shirt too early. Listen, you're
yeah.
gonna see this again next week, just so you know.
But jokes aside, we'll talk a little bit about the theory of loss in games and how to make losing fun and why actually players play games that they know they're going to lose. So that'll be a lot of fun.
I'm really excited for that conversation because I not gonna get into it now, and I'm trying to hold myself back. But as I got, I mean, a huge part is because of you.
Mhm.
But as I got further away from 5e and we're finding things like OSR, what I liked the most was like when my characters died in like fun and interesting ways. And I think like losing things and playing up flaws, like really digging into like the potentially something might view it as like negative, like becomes really, really positive. Like you're
Oh,
not
that's
always a
right.
hero winning everything, never losing anything, and have it all balanced to you. It's, we're designing whole mechanics where you're actively losing something. I feel like it ties you in more emotionally. Like I just find it fun, a lot more fun than just always winning all the time. So, losing, dying, it gets more fun the longer I play tabletop role playing games. So I'm really excited for that conversation, and to see your thoughts also on those things.
It'll be a good time. So,
Yeah.
oops, on that note, do you want to plug anything? Let people know where they can watch
Uh
more TAA stuff and Weekly Scroll, and then I can maybe pitch
yeah,
my stuff real quick.
if you're watching this, we do have, I mean, it's Zemo. So we got a lot of Zemo stuff over on the Weekly Scroll this month. Not going to plug too much. This is going up on YouTube. It's going to take me a little bit to get it a podcast. So I think a lot of the stuff that we're plugging is going to be outdated by the time people listen to us on the podcast. But just, we are the Adventure Archive. We do run actual plays. We do have the Weekly Scroll podcast, where myself and Hunter bring on guests to interview about their games, and do game reviews, like in depth, not flip throughs, like literally reading, generally page by page and giving like reviews on those. So you get a deep dive into a lot of different games. That is a Weekly Scroll. And on the Adventure Archive, it's been a little while since we've been running some games, but I think sooner than later we're going to be starting Cyborg, which is the Cyberpunk Merkborg. And then Jason has some plans after that. So that's basically it. And what about you?
What I would like to point people to is my itch page, sersavictory.itch.io. I recently put up the first of my 12 Dungeon 23 modules, the Lost Caves of the Worm Witch. It is a free 34 room dungeon that's compatible with BX and easily adapted to something like OSC or really any role playing game of choice. Also, jump over to storytellingcollective.com where I will have a new course dropping very soon. So join the mailing list. And then I have a number of courses up there about game design. So Dungeon Design Essentials Moments is my most recent one, where it gives you kind of an overview of how to create interesting moments, iconic moments for your dungeon adventure.
Yeah, super excited. The stuff on Storytelling Collective is fantastic. I mean, I'm glad that we are very good friends and I get to see a lot of it. But
That's right. Yeah.
I can tell you right now, it's super worth it. I highly, highly, highly recommend going. A lot of the things we're gonna like touch on here are a lot more expanded in a lot of Sersa's courses. So you should definitely go check out Storytelling Collective and all that kind of stuff. And as far as I know, pretty much everything on your itch page is free. I mean, that includes like Victory Basic, the Cyclic Dungeon Generator. I mean, a lot of just amazing resources for building, as you said, not just Deathtrap dungeons, but great adventures. So Very, very highly recommend you go check out one of the best people in the industry, and get a lot of their stuff. So go do that. And I think that wraps us up for the episode. So join us next week. We're going to be on every Tuesday, hopefully closer to 7 than 7:30. I think tonight was. And we got at least 10 more weeks in us for this. And sooner than later, I hope to have it up in podcast form as well. So we'll drop the links for that. But Sersa, thank you so much for coming on. I'm super excited for next week. And that's it. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone in chat. We will see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye.